The back door blew open like something had been waiting its whole life to come through it. Glass rattled in the frame, the deadbolt we kept locked, always locked, sheared sideways, and Elena was screaming a word that wasn't even a word, just a high thin sound tearing out of her, and I came around the corner with my heart slamming into my throat and saw the doorway standing wide open onto the black square of night. There was nothing in it. That was the worst part. There was nothing in it, and yet I could feel it out there in the dark, just past the reach of the porch light, watching the hole it had made. I need to go back. I need to start from the beginning, because if I just tell you about that night, you won't understand. You won't understand how a thing can stalk a person for years, how it can become so woven into the fabric of your life that you almost, start to think of it as normal. Let me take you back. Let me show you the house by the river. I was born in the Bronx. Concrete and sirens and the smell of hot asphalt in July, that was my whole world for the first 10 years of my life. My father was gone by then. I won't go into how, except to say that the man responsible got out of prison, and my mother decided she wasn't going to risk staying. She had family up in northern New York, way up where the towns get small and the woods get big, and so she packed up me and my younger brother and we left the only place I'd ever known. It was a different planet. The quiet was the first thing I noticed. In the Bronx there was always a sound, always something humming under everything, the great machine of the city never quite asleep. Up there the silence had a weight to it. At night you could hear your own pulse in your ears. I hated it at first. I didn't know yet that I should have been grateful for the years before the silence started listening back. A few years after we moved, my grandfather sold his property down in the Bronx and came up to join us. He was a stubborn old man, proud, the kind who built things with his own hands and trusted nobody else to do it right. He bought a house on the north side of our new town, right by the river, and the three of us moved in with him. It was a nice place, honestly. A double-wide prefab home, but he'd added an extension and a garage, and out back there was a cement patio you could walk onto straight through a set of glass sliding doors. He'd built a wooden roof over the patio to keep the weather off. Past that was the backyard, half an acre of it, with an above-ground pool ringed by a wooden deck. And behind the pool, at the far edge, a big tool shed where we kept the riding mower. And then the woods. The woods came right up to the edge of the property on every side, like the house was a small clearing the trees had only reluctantly agreed to leave alone. It started almost the moment we moved in. It wasn't anything you could point to. Not at first. It was the feeling of being watched whenever I went outside after dark. You know that feeling, that prickle at the back of the neck, that animal instinct from a time when we were prey and something with teeth was always out beyond the firelight. I'd take the trash out to the cans by the garage and the hair on my arms would stand up, and I'd turn around fast, certain there was someone behind me. There never was. There was only the tree line, black against the deep blue of the night sky, and the soft cold breath of wind moving through it. I told myself it was the move. New place, new sounds, a city kid spooked by all that empty dark. That's what I told myself for a long time. The mind is very good at building little fences around the things it doesn't want to look at. As I got older, the fences started to come down. In the winter, and the winters up there are long and brutal, the snow piling up past the windowsills, I started finding footprints. They'd appear overnight, after a fresh snowfall, when nothing should have been moving. And these weren't the kind of tracks an animal makes, the neat dotted line of a deer or the scattered prints of a stray dog. These were footprints that went all the way around the house. Around the entire house. And at every window, they stopped. They stopped and they faced inward, two prints side by side, as if whatever made them had stood there a long while, looking in. At each window. My mother's window. My brother's. Mine. I thought we had a stalker. That's the rational answer, isn't it? Some sick person from town, some shut in with a thing for watching. I almost preferred that answer. A stalker is a man, and a man can be caught, can be reasoned with, can be shot. But even then, some part of me knew the prints were wrong. They were too deep, the stride between them too long, and there was never a trail leading to them or away from them. The prints just started, circled the house, and stopped. As if the thing that made them had simply lowered itself out of the sky, walked its slow patrol, and lifted itself back up again. Have you ever felt like something was watching you, really felt it, in your spine, in the soft animal part of your brain that knows things your mind refuses to? Tell me in the comments. Because I lived inside that feeling for years, and I learned that it is never, ever wrong. By the time I got to high school, I'd made exactly one friend. His name, I'll call him Marcus, because I'm not going to put his real name out into the world. Marcus was the only person in that whole town who didn't look at me like I was something the river had washed up. Most of the people there hated me. I was Hispanic, I was from the city, I talked different and looked different, and that was all the reason they needed. But Marcus stood up for me. The first time he did it, some kid had me backed against the lockers, and Marcus just walked up and stood next to me, didn't even say much, just made it 2 against 1. We were inseparable after that. And Marcus, God help him, loved the woods behind my house. We'd go out exploring, the two of us, pushing back into the trees where the light went green and dim and the sound of the river became a distant hush. It always gave us a strange feeling back there. A pressure, almost, like the air was thicker. But we were teenage boys, and a strange feeling was an invitation, not a warning. We built ourselves a fort out of fallen logs, a genuinely terrible structure, half collapsed before we'd even finished it, and we'd hang out there for hours, sometimes playing make-believe games we were really too old for, swinging sticks like swords, kings of a kingdom made of rot and moss. One day we found the pit. It was just a depression in the ground at first, an odd sunken place where the earth dipped down for no reason we could see. And because we were idiots, because we were curious in the way that gets people killed in stories like this one, we decided to dig it out. We got down on our knees and clawed at the dirt with our hands and a couple of sticks, and we went down maybe 3 feet before we hit something. Metal. We brushed the dirt away and found ourselves looking at a shopping cart. A rusted shopping cart, buried 3 feet down in the middle of the woods, miles from any store. And it had been wedged in deliberately, jammed into the mouth of what I can only describe as a tunnel, a dark gap in the earth that the cart was blocking, like a cork in a bottle. We didn't say anything. We just looked at each other, and then we ran. We ran all the way back to the house and we didn't talk about it for a long time. We told ourselves we'd come back the next summer and dig it out properly, find out where the tunnel went. But when summer came and we went looking, we couldn't find the spot. Either it had been buried over, or, and this is the thought I've never been able to shake, something had filled it back in. Sealed it. The cork put back in the bottle. We got older. The woods didn't lose their pull on us, but our interests broadened, the way they do for teenage boys. My grandfather had built a second shed in the backyard, over on the far side near the tree line, opposite the tool shed, and he'd more or less given it to us as a place to hang out. We just called it the shed. It became our headquarters. And on occasion, don't tell my grandfather, we'd sneak a beer or two from the fridge and bring them out there and feel very grown up about it. Right outside the door, I dug a fire pit into the dirt and ringed it with stones I hauled up from the riverbank. That's when the activity started to pick up. It's like the fire pit was a signal. Like lighting up that property at night told something exactly where to find us. The first time, we were inside the shed. It was late, and we heard footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate footsteps, circling the shed the way the prince had circled the house all those winters. Marcus heard it the same instant I did, and we both went dead still, and we gave each other that look two people give each other when they're both silently asking, "Do you hear that too? Please tell me you hear that too." The footsteps went all the way around, crunching through the dead leaves. Then the rustling stopped. And then something began to pound on the walls. Not knock. Pound. Heavy, flat blows that shook dust down from the rafters, walking around the shed and striking each wall in turn, hard enough that I felt them in my teeth. We didn't move. We didn't breathe. I have no idea how long it went on. It felt like an hour, it was probably 90 seconds, and then it stopped, as suddenly as it had begun, and the silence that came after was the loudest thing I have ever heard. When we couldn't take the silence anymore, we bolted. Sprinted to the house, slammed the door, threw every lock. You would think that would have been the end of our shed nights. It wasn't. We were gluttons for punishment, or maybe just so morbidly curious that we couldn't stay away. We kept going out there. And for a long time, that was the pattern. Most nights we'd hear the rustling, the footsteps, sometimes the pounding. And the strangest, most terrible thing of all is that we got used to it. It became part of the furniture of our friendship. Oh, there it is again. The human mind will accept anything if you give it enough time. Anything. But hearing it and seeing it are two very different things. One night we built a fire out front of the shed. It was past midnight, maybe much later. We were sitting with our backs to the open backyard, the shed to our right, the dark bulk of the house to our left, and in front of us the line of trees that separated our property from the neighbors. The fire was low and orange, popping softly, and the smoke smelled of pine and wet wood. I heard rustling directly in front of us. Right at the tree line. I looked up. And my heart simply stopped. There was a figure standing in the trees. Tall, unnaturally tall, head and shoulders above where a man's head would be, and thin. Gaunt in a way that made my stomach turn, the proportions all wrong, too long in the limb, too narrow through the body. It was facing us. And as I stared, frozen, unable to make a sound, it slowly leaned forward, tilting toward us, and I saw its face. There was no face. Where a face should have been there was nothing, no eyes, no mouth, no nose, no brow. And its skin, if you could even call it skin, was so black that it had no texture at all. The firelight didn't catch on it. It was as if someone had cut a hole in the world in the exact shape of a tall, thin man, and behind that hole there was only void. A three-dimensional absence, standing at the edge of my yard, leaning toward me. I thought I had finally lost my mind. And then I realized Marcus was no longer beside me, he was already halfway to the house, and that broke the spell, and I ran too, ran like the prey that some old part of me had always known I was. That was the first time we saw it. It was very far from the last. If this story is keeping you up at night, do me a favor and subscribe. We post new horror every single night, and trust me, this is not the worst thing I have to tell you. Stay with me. Because the thing about the figure was that, after a while, it stopped hiding. We started having our fires in an old chiminea instead, a heavy, rusted, oddly ornate cast iron thing the previous owners had left behind on the stone patio. And the figure kept coming. Always on fire nights. Always at the edge of sight. We'd be sitting there and one of us would go quiet and the other would know, would follow his gaze, and there it would be. Standing. Watching. Never coming closer than the tree line, but never leaving either, until we finally gave up and went inside. We never did get used to seeing it the way we'd gotten used to hearing it. Some things the mind refuses to file away as normal, no matter how many times it's forced to look. Marcus started dating a girl around then. I'll call her Elena. She was kind, and she was brave, and she'd come out and hang with us on the property all the time. She didn't really believe us, I think, not until she had to. Which brings me back to the night the door blew open. I was alone in my room. Marcus was in the shower across the hall. Elena was in the dining room, just outside my bedroom door and to the right. Off the dining room there was a small laundry room with a back door, a second back door that led out onto a little wooden porch, with steps down to the stone patio. We kept that door locked. We always kept that door locked. I want to be very clear about that, because of what happened next. I was sitting on my bed when I heard the crash. A huge, splintering, violent crash, and then Elena screaming. I was off the bed and through my door before I'd even decided to move, and I found her standing in the dining room, white as paper, one shaking hand pointed toward the laundry room. Something busted it open, she said. Something busted it open. I looked. The locked back door was standing wide open. The cold night air was pouring in through it. And beyond the doorway, there was nothing, just the dark porch, the dark patio, the dark line of trees. Nothing you could see. But you could feel it. You could feel that it had just been there, that it had reached out and shoved a deadbolt door open like it was paper and then stepped back to watch us react. I did something reckless. I'm not proud of it. In the heat of the moment, terrified and furious and certain it was the thing that had been hunting us for years, I grabbed my grandfather's little .22 rifle from where he kept it, and I went to the open door, and I fired into the woods, angled away from the houses, away from anyone, and I screamed at it. Screamed at the dark to leave us alone. Marcus came tearing out of the bathroom in a towel, and he yelled at me, "What the hell are you doing? If that's a person, you can kill them." And he was right. He was right and I knew it. But it was the way he said it that stuck with me. If that's a person. Not you could kill someone, but if that's a person. In the middle of all that panic, Marcus had said the quiet thing out loud. He'd been thinking exactly what I'd been thinking for years. That it wasn't a person at all. That it never had been. Years went by. I graduated. Marcus and Elena went their separate ways. And I started dating someone new, I'll call her Sarah. Remember her. She matters for the end of this. One night near the tail end of winter, I stepped out onto the patio steps just outside the sliding doors to smoke a cigarette. The snow was still deep, glowing faintly blue in the dark, the cold so sharp it hurt to breathe. I stood there with the cherry of my cigarette the only warm thing for 100 yards. And then I heard it. A sound like a musket going off, a deep, flat, percussive boom that rolled across the yard. And I watched as the snow in the tree line erupted, blew apart in a spray of white, exactly as if something enormous had been shot clean through it. I ran inside. And, like an idiot, instead. Of calling the police, I called Marcus. Some things you can only share with the one person who's been there the whole time. He came right over. We grabbed rifles and flashlights and we went out into the freezing dark to search the woods where the blast had come from, our breath steaming, the beams of our lights swinging through the black trunks. We found no one. No sign of anyone. But here is the thing I have turned over in my mind 10,000 times since: there were no footprints. None. The snow was deep and untouched everywhere around the spot where the trees had exploded. No tracks leading in. No tracks leading out. Whatever had made that sound, whatever had torn through the tree line, had left no mark on the earth at all. Marcus stayed the night to keep me from losing my mind. It didn't really help. A few months later, Sarah and I got closer, and I finally told her everything. All of it: the prints in the snow, the pounding on the shed, the faceless thing at the tree line, the door, the musket shot in the dark. I was sure she'd think I was insane. I'd more or less made my peace with the idea that telling her would be the end of us. She didn't think I was crazy. She said she believed me. And then she said she wanted to see it for herself. I told her the truth, that it seemed to come out when there was a fire. And without missing a beat she said we should have a fire that very night, and that she'd bring her 2 best friends over, so there'd be witnesses. So that, finally, I'd know whether I was sane or not. That night we sat out on the stone patio, the fire crackling in the old chiminea, our chairs in a loose half-circle facing the tree line. We were laughing. Having a genuinely good time, the 4 of us, the fire warm on our faces and the cold at our backs. And at some point I glanced toward the shed. And there it was. Walking. Not standing this time, walking, in the open, straight along the tree line, coming from the direction of the shed toward the house. Tall and thin in that same impossible textureless black, a man-shaped hole gliding through the dark. And for the first time in my life, I smiled. Because this was the moment. This was the moment I'd find out if it was real, or if I'd been carrying a sickness in my mind all these years. It came to the point directly in front of where we were sitting. And it stopped. And it turned its head, its faceless head, toward us. Held there a moment. Then it kept walking, past the edge of the house, and was gone. I didn't say a word. I turned, very slowly, and I looked at Sarah. She had the face of someone who had just watched a murder. Bloodless. Jaw slack. Eyes huge and fixed on the exact spot where the thing had disappeared. And before I could say anything, before I could even feel the strange, sick relief of finally being believed, she shot to her feet and screamed one word. Nope. And she ran inside. We never had a fire together again. Not once. A few weeks later, something happened that turned the whole thing from a haunting into something far worse. Something with a history. There was a Civil War reenactment that the town held every year at a local state park, and Sarah and I went. While I was wandering the little displays and tables, I came across a book I'd never seen before, a thin volume of local history. I flipped it open, and I started reading a story about the native people who had lived in this area long before the town existed. The story went like this. There had been a tribe with land in this precise area. And one night, French soldiers came down the river, and they set fire to a longhouse, a great communal dwelling, with everyone inside it. Men, women, children. They burned them alive. I turned the page. And on the next page there was an old hand-drawn map. The territory of the tribe. The river. And the approximate location of the longhouse, marked with a small symbol. I recognized it. I recognized all of it. The river on the map was the same river that ran across the road from my grandfather's house, the river I'd grown up beside. And the longhouse, the place where dozens of people had been burned alive in the dark, sat almost exactly where my home stood now. Everything clicked into place at once, and it was the worst kind of understanding, the kind that explains everything and comforts nothing. I was living on the site of a massacre. A massacre by fire. And I was being stalked by something that comes straight out of the folklore of the people who had died here, a tall, gaunt, hungry thing of the northern woods. And it was always most active, always closest, when there was a fire burning on the property. Fire had taken them. And fire, I think, was what called it back. I wish I could tell you the story ends with me figuring it all out and walking away wiser. It doesn't. It ends the way these things always seem to, with the trap closing. A few years on, after I'd failed out of college and moved back in with my grandfather, I was in a bad way. Drinking too much, sleeping at odd hours, just generally lost. One day I drank far too much and passed out cold in my room. And I should mention, we didn't have working fire alarms. Not one in the whole house. I came up out of that drunken sleep stone cold sober. That's the part one can't explain. I went from blackout drunk to wide awake and clear in a single instant, sat bolt upright with a feeling crawling all over my skin, a feeling that something was wrong. I got up and walked out of my room. And there in the kitchen was my grandfather, fighting a wall of fire that had engulfed the stove. He had a pot of water in his hands, about to throw it on the flames. I screamed at him to stop. It was a grease fire, water would have turned it into a fireball that took us both, and I grabbed a box of salt and dumped it over the burning pan, smothering the flames. The fire on the stove went out. And then I looked up. And the relief died in my chest. The inside of the vent fan above the stove was glowing. Glowing orange from within, and the fan was still running, sucking the fire up into the guts of the house. I yelled at my grandfather that we had to get out now. I grabbed the cordless house phone off the wall and I hauled him out the front door into the night. Out front, I went to dial 911. And the phone was dead. The line was already gone. What would you have done? I still wonder, to this day, whether I made the right call, or whether I just got lucky enough to live and tell you about the wrong one. Because here's what I did. I thought about how the neighbors were never home. How we lived in the middle of nowhere, no one close enough to see the smoke, no one to run to. And I thought about the other phone, the second one, in my bedroom, and I knew exactly where it was. So I left my grandfather standing safe in the front yard, and I ran back into the burning house. The smoke was already too thick to see through. I had to navigate by muscle memory alone, one hand on the wall, eyes streaming, the only light a hellish orange glow where the kitchen was being eaten alive behind me. I made it to my room. I grabbed the blanket off my bed and shook it, frantic, and I caught a glimmer, the last of the light reflecting off the screen of the phone, and I snatched it up and turned and ran back out through the smoke, lungs full of poison, and burst out the front door into the cold clean air. I dialed 911. I barely managed to choke out where we were and what was happening before the line went dead in my hand. The fire had finally reached the wiring and cut us off mid-sentence. But it was enough. They came. I found out later why the house was already doomed even after I put out the stove fire. The ventilation in the range hood was made of plastic, cheap plastic ducting running up through the walls. When the fire climbed into the vent, the plastic melted, and the melting plastic ignited the insulation inside the walls. By the time I'd smothered the flames on the stove, the fire was already loose inside. The bones of the house, spreading where I couldn't see it or reach it. They told us we'd had about 2 minutes. 2 minutes, total, from the moment I woke. If I hadn't come up out of that dead drunk sleep stone cold sober when I did, for no reason, with no alarm to wake me, my grandfather and I would both have burned to death in our beds. We never went back to that property. Not once. We packed up what little the fire had left us and we left the house by the river to rot, and as far as I know it stands there still, empty, at the edge of the woods, on the ground where the longhouse burned. I've thought about it every day since. About the prints in the snow that started and stopped with no trail. About the cart buried over the tunnel. About the faceless thing that walked the tree line on fire nights, and the door that opened itself, and the musket shot that left no tracks. And about how it all ended, how I, of all the ways a person can go, almost burned to death in that very house, on that very ground, where so many others burned before me. There's something disturbingly, morbidly poetic in that. As if the whole thing had always been pointed at that single ending, and only some last-minute mercy, or some last cruelty, a meal denied, pulled me back out of the smoke. I don't know what woke me that night, stone-cold sober, in time to save us both. I'd like to think it was something good. But after everything that happened on that land, after years of being watched and hunted and visited by a hunger as old as the woods themselves, I've come to believe it was something else. I think the thing that stalked me for all those years wasn't done with me. I think it just wasn't ready to let the fire have me. Not yet. Not when it had waited so long, and watched so patiently, and was so very, very hungry. Subscribe for more horror every single night. And if you want more stories that will keep you up, check out What the Wow Stories for the wildest relationship drama you've ever heard. Link below. Sleep well.